Hello everyone, I was in a mood, and I made pizza and there's flour on my shirt, so stop judging me. I wanted to talk about this tweet that I, disproportionately managed to paste into Paint here, that Maui put out about, everything being T-sided now. Spawned a big community discussion, and I have strong opinions about this subject, so I am going to try and lay out my case why I think this is bad, and why I think people misunderstand what it means when something is T-sided and why it's bad. Because I see a lot of the community end up talking about the economy. I don't think it's the most important thing. So I'll try and make my case for what I think is going on in the game and why I think it needs to change, or at least needs to be considered or discussed in a different way. This is a topic that I've thought about for a really long time. So I'm glad that somebody else is bringing it up too. I think, say, Maui's take here is pretty middle of the road, which is uncommon for Maui. I'm sure he doesn't necessarily care that much about it, but from my point of view, I care a lot about this, and I think it is important. So let me try and explain why. And to do that, I've loaded up Paint. It's dangerous, and I'm going to try and see if I can sort of, throw in some stuff here just to show you guys what I sort of think is the big issue and why I think it's a problem. Anyway, Cobblestone famously, for those who weren't around at the time, it's a very T-sided map, and I think this was a really, really big problem. Because it changes how people play the map and what's allowed for. So let's just try and take a look at this. So here's what I'm trying to say. If I'm holding this position here where you can jump up to try and see if any T's are hanging around out here. Right, there are two basic ways to this bomb site. One is this route, and another one is the drop, and then kind of going this way. All right, these are the two primary ways you can attack the bomb site. So the problem is, if I'm on the CT side, I need to know, are there any T's that are hanging out in this area? And as a secondary kind of thing, I guess we could say, it's also very important for me to know if there might be any T's that are hanging out in this area, which is sort of fairly, closely adjacent to the map. It doesn't matter that the new version of Cobbles had, different routes here. It's completely irrelevant to the point that I'm making. This part of the map is the same, and it's a problem. Now, the issue is, one, if I go up here and I actually peek down this lane, it's a really wide, it's a really sort of long thing that I'm looking down here. Fairly easy for me to just sort of end up in a fight where it's like a straight, 1v1 aim fight, or maybe there are more people there even. Also, the T's can hide in a lot of these corners, so just taking a glance down here, even if I see nobody, I can't really make much of a call. I can say they're not immediately at the site, but that's about it. Like, I don't have a lot of information, and I definitely don't know if they're hanging around back here. So that means I have to risk quite a bit, and I get almost no information. If I decide on the CT side to say, okay, I'm going to try to walk. I'm going to take this walk down here to not just guess, but to really find out for sure. Is anyone holding? Then this whole path, I have nowhere to hide. If there's a pop flash around the corner, if there are 3 people swinging me, whatever it is, like, I'm dead every time. And sure, in theory, if I get all the way in here, I mean, there's a ton of corners here that are going to make it very hard for me to even be comfortable doing that. But sort of in theory, I could get in here and try, and then I might be onto something, and then I could probably start to say, let's see, I turn the corner here and I look in and I see nobody. You're probably going to say, okay, listen, if we have more people at the bomb site, start to rotate on over, because probably this is not going to be an attack towards this bomb site. Fair enough, fine, you can maybe do that. But in general, I'd probably say it's not going to be easy to try to actually get in here and find any information. So, is there any other way to get information on Cobblestone? Well, maybe. You can push down here on the CT side and try to occupy this. Obviously, on the newer version, there was like a link that went up here, which is, again, for our purposes, it doesn't matter for anything I'm saying here. Or you could try and push out here and sort of hang out here and try to say, okay, listen, we're going to get at least advanced warning. We're going to sort of know what's happening. The issue is, if you go beyond this point, so if you go out to look at this huge courtyard or up this, there's almost every chance that you're going to die. It's such a wide open space, and you're coming from a very narrow choke point. Just think about the logic of it. Any T's that are out here who want to hold these angles, they can be anywhere, right? And they don't have to look a bunch of places. They just have to jiggle and look at a corner or whatever, and that's it. So not very favorable. And again, even if you look, how much do you really know? How much information is there actually to pass on here? I would argue probably not that much. And that's a really big issue, right? So I could look out and I could say, oh, there's nobody out here, but I couldn't really say for sure. They could be around the corner in, you know, in 10 million different ways. And it, you know, especially on these versions where there's more of a sort of elaborate stair situation going on here, they don't have to be that far away. And the problem is, if I can't even hold this, which very often in Cobblestone you really couldn't, right? You don't often end up in a position where you can hold all of this. You end up being pushed further back. And the further back you go, if for those of you who remember what the game played out like, you would end up holding some of these further back positions here as much as you could. Although very often, you'd really only have one person here. So you wouldn't have 2 or 3 heal here. The reason that happened is because very often, it was hard to hold this bomb site even with 4 people. You would end up with this 4-1 split. And for me, that makes for bad Counter-Strike. If I see this happening all the time on a map, it tells me that the CT side is under so much pressure to try to defend even one of the sites that actually they've sort of given up on making, let's say, rational decisions. And now we're just playing sort of a game of dice. And I would almost say, well, why even do 4-1? Why not just do all 5 in one bomb site? And if they attack or whatever, then hopefully it works out. Now, in a modern day, you know, Cobblestone's quite... It's been a minute, you know? In a modern day, probably you did 5 in one bomb site. The enemy team would figure it out a lot easier, and maybe that would never work. But I'm just saying that, in theory, it's not a lot of fun Counter-Strike if we say, round number 1, we're going to do 5 here, and then round number 2, we're going to do 5 here. And then we'll just, you know, we'll keep rolling the dice on whether it's A or B. And maybe we can just run back and forth in between the, you know, the rounds or whatever, because... that actually might be a better defense than the other kind of defense where we say, we're going to figure out where's the attack coming from. And when we know, we're going to, you know, we're going to call on the radio and we're going to say, or on the walkie-talkie, we're going to say, hey, listen, guys, I think they're coming to the A-bomb side. They've taken this. I've seen 2 people. They've thrown a smoke here. I've got some early information, guys. Let's go. And then you're sort of, you know, then your teammates will rotate in and you say, oh, we won the round, partly because we're good at shooting, but also partly because we made good tactical decisions as a defense. And we're able to get more people to defend the site. That's, I think, what's supposed to be happening when you're playing the CT side. Well, that is really, really hard to do on a map like Cobblestone. And it's one of the reasons is the fact that this long corridor exists. The other reason is that this drop thing means, again, that T's can hold right here and... you know, you could be here forever and you might never know how many people are up here, like, so that you just don't have the information 99% of the time. The other problem is, obviously, the big choke point on this map, apart from the drop area here, is over here. So on the CT side, you're very tempted to try and play close to this choke point, close to this area, because once you let them out onto this plateau here, they now have a huge angle to fight in, right? You'd rather try and fight them when they're in choke point, logically speaking, than you would if they're out in the open, because now it's more of a easy sort of more open fight for everybody. I mean, sure, having AWP might change the dynamic of this a little bit, but a lot of the time you're going to end up playing some of these deeper positions. Now, this position is super far away from over here, right? Because the map is squished in this way, or it's like elongated in this fashion, which again means it's hard for you to leave this position and go help out your teammates in this bomb site. One is that you can get intercepted along the way if people drop, but also the T's can probably run quicker, right? If I'm on the T side and I'm playing here, and I, let's say, throw some sort of a lurk smoke to this position and maybe like a couple of flashbangs over, and then I run back like this, there's a decent chance I'll make this run way before you can actually make a rotation. And if there are no other CTs over here, right? If there are no players... you know, playing anywhere in these corners who hear me run or anything, like if they can't be here because they've already been fought back, then there's no advanced warning. They don't know anything. They can't make any choices. And I think my position is that makes for worse Counter-Strike to watch. It's not that much fun because you end up in a position very often where, obviously, I'm speaking about this from a commentator's point of view, but my feeling is that you end up with a story that is functionally the equivalent of watching somebody trying to stop a bank robbery by just putting a bunch of cops in one of the city's banks, hoping that it's the right one. Whereas in fact, you know, it could be any of the 10 banks in the city that are about to get robbed. And we're not, you know, imagine you're in the cinema and you're watching this movie and it's like dramatic music playing, all the cops are ready in the bank. And then it's on the news and they say like, oh, they robbed the bank on 5th Street. And you guys are all on like, you know, 19th Avenue or whatever the case may be. And it's like, oh, okay, well, let's check in tomorrow. Like next day, you know, in the movie, next day, we're trying a new bank this time, guys. And it's like, what's the point here? What are we doing, you know? Sure, if it's the right bank, great. Now we've got some action. Now it could be exciting. Let's see if we can win the fight. Same with Cobblestone. And I think, ironically, one of the reasons why Cobblestone is thought of as such a good map is actually because of this, what I consider to be almost a design flaw in the map, which is that it does mean that at some point, one, the CTs can't save anymore. It's no longer a good idea to save because you're running out of rounds. You have to fight. So then you do get attempts at really insane retakes, because now the retakes are the only thing. Like, it doesn't matter that you're out of position, but you just have to do it anyway.
Imagine James Outsider / versus Pro on Cobble. Save meta on Cobble. Hell no.
And also, sometimes, obviously, you know, you get to be really far behind, and you know that every single CT round matters an enormous amount, and, you know, you win one or two of them, and it's like, yes, like, it just means so much. And that is exciting in a way that does build up some drama. I don't think that drama makes up for the rest of the rounds. To some extent, you're watching somebody just roll the dice a lot and hope that their defense is roughly in the right position. Not because they made good calculations about what was going on, or because they had some deep insight into what the incoming attack was going to be or anything, just because, I mean, they happen to be right in that round. So that's my analysis of this situation from the CT side. I just don't think it's a fun story. I don't think it works well when you're watching it, or at least not if you understand what's going on. Maybe playing it could be okay. Like, I understand, again, I think I said this on Twitter, and I'll just reiterate it here. I think the challenge is that Valve are not just looking at the esports scene, right? They're looking at all of the player population. And I could understand why Valve might say, well, why don't we have just all the maps be 50-50? That means if a new person joins Counter-Strike for the first time, they don't end up in a situation where they're playing some aggressively CT-sided map where they just get beat up and lose, you know, whatever, 9-3 or 10-2 or something. Because that doesn't feel good, right? If you lose 10-2 in the first half, you don't think to yourself, if you're a new player, oh, damn, this is sick. Let's see if we can make the comeback. You think, well, this is insane. Like, I don't know what's happening with this map, you know? So you probably, as a Valve, you're thinking, let's make both sides on all maps pretty much the same. And then we've sold a, you know, everyone's having a pretty good correlation between the expectation of what you might be playing and what you're actually getting. Like, on average, you're getting sort of much the same. Like, you have every chance to win. Second half will do the same. We can do, like, it's all going to be good, you know? The problem is, I think for an esports game, it works worse. I don't think the 50-50 model is particularly good. And again, because of how Counter-Strike works, because of the logic of the game and how it's built into it, I think it's a worse experience to have, well, especially T-sided maps, but even the 50-50 stuff. I think it's fine to have most of the map be a 50-50. I wish there was a couple that were really CT-sided. You might think, well, why would that work? Or didn't we just make a strong argument that maps, you know, can't be T-sided because, again, think of the bank robbery scenario. But it's not the same in reverse. And I'll use the same example for the bank robbery movie, because this is how I think of, you know, the story in the game, basically. If we do the reverse movie, where we've got, you know, 10 banks, and let's say it's a really CT-sided map, so all the banks are pretty heavily defended. Maybe some are a little bit less than others, but, you know, roughly 10 banks. And you've got, you know, your crew of bank robbers that are trying to rob a bank. And let's say they fail. You know, that's part of the movie script, is that they fail a bunch of times, but every time they learn something. They figure out a little bit of something, you know, a new routine from a guard. They figured out, okay, Wednesday's better than Thursday, assuming they don't get arrested for whatever fucking reason in this movie. But, you know, every time they learn something, I think you can make a compelling argument that that is an exciting build-up. There's something about this, like, they get a bit closer. There's, you know, do they have the right weapons? If we go back to the Counter-Strike example, you know, if I'm watching a T-side on a really CT-sided map, go back to Old Nuke or Train, both my favorite maps, really at different points, and the excitement of watching a team that gets close, they unlock some new thing, they realize, ooh, this ramp player, he's not as sharp as he should be, or if we smoke outside, this ramp player will, you know, he'll fall back and play hell instead of actually on the ramp, or whatever it is. Like, little bits of information get put together to build the right attack. And because it's a really CT-sided map, you don't need that many T rounds. So winning 1 or 2 or 3 has a huge impact on the game, right? And if the commentators are good, and if the audience is well educated, or whether they have some combination thereof, I think that's really sick. I love that story. I think we're missing in Counter-Strike now. Again, understand why it's hard for Valve to implement this. I wish we could for tournaments somehow, because it's a really fun puzzle to solve. It's fun to watch somebody try. And it's a different mental challenge, right? It is mentally hard to lose. You know, back we were playing MR15, right? It's hard to lose like a 13-2 half on Nuke. and then knowing that you have to come back now and do the same thing now that you're on the CT side. But it happened a lot. Like, people made these comebacks, and every time it was like, it was sick to see, in my opinion at least. A lot of people hated it, but I didn't. I don't really care if I'm in the minority on this. I might be, but I don't care. I feel strongly about this, and I think it's important to talk about. So my position is that you can have very CT-sided map. I don't want all the maps to be like that. That would be boring. We could have maybe one map that's a little bit more T-sided. Maybe that's okay. If they become too T-sided, I really fundamentally don't think it works for Counter-Strike any longer. I just don't think so. Now, I don't think we actually have any of those maps right now. It's not so bad. Anubis is, or can be, pretty T-sided, but there are things to do on the CT side. You're not just rolling the dice every round and saying, oh, let's go do one or the other. Like, you can do some CT aggression. I thought it was going to be worse, and I think I made that part clear at the time. And I think I was wrong, and that's fine. There are some aggressive stuff you can do on Anubis. I will still say the reason Anubis is more T-sided is because the risk of that aggression is really high for the CTs. It just is almost everywhere on the map, right? But okay, we don't have to remove Anubis. I don't think it's a big problem. I actually like the map, so I'm not going to complain about it. I just wish that there was a counterbalancing effect where we had some maps that were more CT-sided so that we can have the other side of the game, which is the problem solving, the trying to put together stuff, you know, and sort of learning from all the rounds you lose and accepting the fact that you might lose 5-6 rounds in a row. And it's totally fine, because if you just learn enough in those 5 or 6 rounds, or if you keep the economy low enough, or you're essentially building some way into it, on whatever day 7 of the movie script, you've got all the guard routines down, you have the blueprints or whatever, and you actually pull off the heist or whatever. I think that's a really nice build-up, and I think it works really well for what Counter-Strike just is. Like, obviously Counter-Strike is all the other things too, and yes, we could do it by making defuse kits free, or, you know, doubling the radius of the incendiary grenades, and there's like a million other ways that we could change the maps. But here's the problem. If you make the M4s cheaper, let's say, or the defuse kit, all you're really doing is you're saying we're going to have more rounds where the CTs can guess where the attack is going to be. I fundamentally don't care about that. It might change a couple of things, and it might be needed for other things in the game, but in terms of the logic of, I think, what it means to defend and attack in a logical way, it doesn't really change anything about that. So let's say right now, if you're having a really hard CT side on a map like Anubis, and you end up with, you know, only 4 buy rounds in 12 or something like that, I don't know, 6 buy rounds in 12, whatever it is. If that were 8 instead, or 9, or 10 even, let's say we made it all the weapons super cheap on the CT side. Yeah, I mean, you get more rounds where you have better guns. It's going to increase your chances to win the rounds. But if I'm watching the game, or especially if I'm a commentator of the game, or if I appreciate what Counter-Strike is, I don't think I should be more excited about watching more people roll the dice more time. Like, in theory, those extra buy rounds could all just be people showing up at the wrong bomb site and saying, oh, that was the wrong bomb site, and that didn't really work out. I think the joy and the excitement for a lot of the CT side defenses that are happening is when the CT side actually does something, and they actually are proactive. At least not every round, because if you did it every round, then it would obviously be easy to pick off, and it would stop working. But think about Mirage, where you successfully, you push into the palace, or you get into the B hallways, and you're in T-spawn flanking the enemy team, and the rest of your teammates can go to the A bomb site, and it's all happening. Like, you did it. You made a real choice that said, is pushing the B hallways dangerous on Mirage? Yeah, it is. There could be someone hiding in a corner somewhere you don't know about. It's a risk versus reward thing, but doing it has such a massive, massive reward, and the risk is somewhat manageable. But then we have a story. We have stuff to talk about. We can appreciate the fact that, okay, actually the Ts are not walking into a trap. The CTs did something to make their defense a rational defense as opposed to just a chance-based kind of situation. So I think that's I guess, to avoid repeating myself forever, that is my overarching argument. I think we could go through all the maps if people are interested and kind of talk about what are the different, problems that exist. I think Dust 2 right now has a very similar-ish problem, which is very, very hard to get information on the CT side. Definitely not impossible, and there are teams that are good at it. There are a lot of teams who are not, and you see them in these different maps where they play even at a high level, and they've got 1 B, 1 middle, 3 somewhere on A. And if that 1 B player you know, dies, there's no information. They have no way of knowing. They don't know if the rest of the team is on catwalk or if they're out along or anything like that. So when somebody dies, like, either you have a lot more people there by chance, more or less, or, you know, or you just lose the round and you just save instantly. And I just don't think it's very compelling at all. I think that's my big point. I wanted to make this video because, like I said, I care about this stuff. I think it's important. I think that Counter-Strike is an interesting mix of mechanics and strategy and a million other things. It's also the maps. And I think the maps are super, super important. And I think they can only play out in a certain sort of number of ways. And if you start to go really drastically far away from it, I think Counter-Strike won't feel so much like Counter-Strike anymore, even if everything else still stays the same. So anyway, I would actually love to know what you guys think about this. Again, like, it's a bit of a long rant. I recognize that. But yeah, leave some comments down below if you have any thoughts about it. I'd love to know. Maybe I'm super wrong. I'm always open to being wrong. So yeah, if I screwed something up here, then tell me about it and tell me what your thoughts are. But this is my opinion about why I think maps are important and also why I think they can't be too T-sided. So see you guys in the next one. Peace and take care.